Wait, Chris, what are you doing?
Jeez, stop it.
Wait,
Don't show this.
Is that a Nikon polarizer?
No, it's not.
Canon body?
Hey, just get that camera to my face. Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. Chris Nichols here. I want you to join me today for a little travel through the southern Alberta prairies. We're gonna head down to a town called Lethbridge. I've actually lived here a very long time, and I've never been to this town. There's an amazing bridge there. I don't know if it's because bridge is in the name of the town. I don't know if they're related. I have no idea. But we're gonna go explore this town. You know, some of the nice little towns on the way down. Should be fun because we've got the brand new Canon EOS R6. But I want you to know that Jordan, as a special treat, is shooting the entire video today on a very pre-production Canon EOS R5, okay? So just keep that in mind. He's hand-holding it all day to test out the IBIS. It's gonna have the dual pixel AF2 system going all day as well. But remember that this is not a final production camera. But let's take this full production R6, go into the country. So we made a pit stop here in the lovely town of Fort Macleod on the way. You can enter your Highlander jokes right in there. That's a great time to do it. They're much appreciated. And we always like to start off our videos talking about the handling of the camera. Now, the Canon EOS R6 feels a lot like the Canon EOS R, for example. Fantastic grip. I mean, really, really comfortable. The things that strike me right away. So first off, the EOS R6 does have a mode dial on top, a classic mode dial. You don't get the top LCD panel that some of the other EOS R cameras have, but you still get fantastic dials, and that's one of my favorite things here. 3 control dials. I mean, I've got ISO on the back, shutter speed, aperture, or exposure compensation, depending on what mode I'm in, and it really does let you set up and customize these cameras to behave exactly like you want them to. Now, other controls on the camera. First off, the on-off switch is still in the familiar place for EOS R users. It's here on the top left. Now, Jordan hates that. I actually really don't mind it at all. I feel like, you know, it keeps everything clean over here. I don't have a flicking on-off switch, and I find with my left hand, I'm shooting the camera, I just naturally put my thumb there, click it on, click it off. In fact, they've added a little bit of tooth there on the back to give you even more positive grip on that. Here, I love that we now have a joystick on the back, and the AF on button has been moved from the far right to a far more natural, comfortable position here, and it goes exactly where that absolutely horrible garbage multifunction touch bar was on the EOS R. Now, we do have a 20 megapixel sensor here on the EOS R6, and I know that's a little bit lower than the competition. We can't confirm it, but we're pretty sure we have a very similar sensor to what you'd find in the 1DX Mark III. Now, that 20 megapixel resolution isn't great, but it does have some advantages. For example, this sensor has a better than average readout speed, which means that if you're doing things like electronic shutter shots, you don't want those hard diagonals from rolling shutter, it'll help to avoid that. Yeah, this sensor's a little bit lower res and a little bit softer than the competition, but everything looks great on Instagram, right?
Jordan here to talk about the EOS R6 for video shooters. Now, I do feel like the EOS R5 grabbed all the headlines with its 8K recording, but this is actually a very competent video camera. To start out with, you're getting its 4K capture taken from just over a 5K image, so it's quite sharp, and importantly, there's very little rolling shutter when you're using that. So if you're filming something with a lot of fast action, it's going to do a great job. Now, there is a very minor crop on this. It's a 1.07 times crop, so it's not really going to affect when you're framing things, not a major loss in quality, but it's something to be aware of. Now, I was also very curious about the 1080 recording because the EOS R, when you were shooting in the full width, was actually quite soft, and I'm happy to say that it is considerably sharper on the R6 here, and that extends to the 1080 120 mode, which looks quite good on this. Now, of course, it's not going to hold a candle to the 4K 120 recording that you see on the R5, but it's still great when you need that effect once in a while. Now, as far as the color space on this, it is recording a 4K 10-bit signal when you're using the C-Log profile, or it's HDR recording, which is in PQ. So that's ready if you just want to display something right on a monitor and take advantage of the dynamic range. The C-Log would be if you want to grade it. Now bear in mind this is just C-Log 1, so if you regularly use C-Log 2 or 3 on Canon cinema cameras and want them to match, afraid not, you're going to go with C-Log 1 for this. But it's still very easy to grade, and dynamic range is quite good on this camera. Now I was really excited to test the IBIS system, the in-body image stabilization of the R5 and the R6. And you can see it does a really nice job. When you're panning or tilting, it's not fighting you. It looks quite good when you're walking, although I wouldn't say it's quite as smooth as the implementation from Olympus. Now, if you're planning to do locked off shots, it's fantastic. I mean, you can just sit here and read this sign that has the fascinating history of the Lethbridge Bridge, and you can see very little movement to it, even though that was at 50 millimeters. There's a few nice things on the R6 that we haven't seen before on a Canon camera. I really like that it can now do exposure adjustments by 1/8 stop increments, so it can be very precise, but also if it's in an auto mode, it'll very smoothly shift its exposure. As well, I really like that we now have zebras on this, and they are quite customizable, but there are some real issues I have with this camera as well. So let's start with exposure. Now, this only offers you program or manual exposure. So if you're someone who likes to use aperture priority or shutter priority recording video, that's not available. Fortunately, you can still set auto ISO in manual mode, which is generally how I like to shoot with changing lighting situations. Now, I love the autofocus system on this camera. It's the dual pixel autofocus 2. It's my favorite video autofocus implementation. However, if I want to select my subject for tracking, I have to touch on the touch screen. I would love a way to be able to use the joystick, set it on top of my subject, and initiate tracking that way. Unfortunately, that's not available now, but it would be an easy firmware fix. Another thing that's really aggravating is that you don't have a histogram or your level while you're rolling video, and both of those things are just as important when you're rolling as when you're not. The other thing I know a lot of people are curious about is the overheating because of some of the issues that the R5 has. Now, it's quite well controlled. I was able to shoot a 4K 60 clip up to 29 minutes at room temperature, 21 degrees Celsius, before it shut off, and then it was 5 minutes before I could start recording again. However, when I went and tried to record in 24, I was able to shoot for over an hour without even an overheat warning. So I think in most situations, unless you record all of your A-roll at 60p, you're not going to have any problems with overheating, but we'll see in hotter climates. Unfortunately, I'm in Canada. Overall, I just find the EOS R6 a very compelling option for video shooters. The combination of great autofocus, good in-body image stabilization, and 10-bit 4K means that the R6 is probably the camera to go for if you split your duties between stills and videos 50-50.
All right, so we're just sitting here by the shores of Henderson Lake, right down in central Lethbridge, and we just had a really nice visit, got some samples in the Nika Yuko Japanese Gardens, beautiful in there. I also happened to see a poster of Mark Sakamoto, a Canadian author who apparently is the twin brother I never knew I had. So I don't know, read one of his books, I'm sure they're great. Now, even though both the R5 and the R6 are very different price points, they have equally capable IBIS systems, which is fantastic for a more affordable full-frame camera like the R6. Now, they are SEPA rated at 8 stops, which would make this the best IBIS system in the world. You know, again, everybody's different. Their capabilities, what they're able to handhold, and from what I was testing there, at 105mm equivalent focal length, I was getting about 1/4 of a second, 1/5 of a second, which for me on an IBIS system is pretty good. I think I'd put it above the Nikon, the Sonys, the Panasonics. I don't know if I'd put it above the Olympus. I feel like I'm still a little bit more stable on the Olympus. Now keep in mind, that is just me, but I do feel like the Canon IBIS system does live up to a lot of its hype. It is a very capable system. And on the 20 megapixels here on the R6, I think it's quite good. It does leave me with a question though, when I do finally get a production R5, will I be able to get the same results with that 45 megapixel sensor, or am I gonna have to speed up that shutter speed a little bit? I can't wait to find out. Now it's nice to see that we have a very usable EVF here in the R6. good clarity, 3.68 million dots of resolution. I do like that you can crank it from 60 frames per second up to 120 frames per second. And the only thing to remember is you do have to do that. It's not set that way by default. I think 60 frames per second would be fine for most situations, but if I was shooting sports, action, wildlife, I'd crank it up to 120 just to make sure that I don't miss a beat. We also have an excellent back panel. Fully touchscreen, fully articulating, 3-inch, 1.68 million dot back panel. That's also got very good clarity and it's very nice to use. Now, what's that gonna do to our overall battery life, having these nice displays? Well, we have a brand new battery. It's an LPE6NH. Same form factor as the LPE6. You actually get about 20% roughly more battery life than a classic LPE6. And yes, you can use both batteries in this camera. With the modern LPE6NH battery this camera comes with those panels at 120 frames per second, I'm gonna get about 250 CPR rated shots. Not bad. Not great though. You'll definitely want to carry extra batteries, and you might even want to get a BGR10 grip. That works on both the R5 and R6. Might be important not only to balance bigger lenses, but also give you more usable battery life. Now, as for charging the batteries, I would mostly just rely on the standard external charger that is provided because it works. And why I say that is because Canon cameras that charge through USB ports can be a little finicky about which chargers they will or will not work with. Now, the R6 does absolutely charge LPE6NH batteries in camera. They do provide a USB-C cable, but you really got to test out which chargers you're going to use and make sure they work, because a lot of PD-rated chargers just might not. All right, this is what we drove out for. We're here. This is technically known as the Lethbridge Viaduct, but a lot of people here call it the high-level bridge, and it is quite an amazing bridge, I have to say. So we're just going to look at it for a while. Maybe take a picture. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. So Jordan and I have used the EOS R quite a bit for sample photos with a lot of our RF lens tests. And I mean, 30 megapixels is very respectable, absolutely. So why would I want to drop down 10 megapixels to go to this sensor? We have talked about how you're getting a very fast readout. It's actually 19 milliseconds, very quick. Again, great for silent shutter, eliminating rolling shutter. But you know, I don't use a lot of electronic shutter myself when I'm shooting. Fair enough, you might not as well. So what else can we get out of this sensor? Well, Canon have often had an issue with things like dynamic range, and low light performance could be better too, and that's what I really appreciate about this sensor. You know, design being very similar to 1DX Mark III, we now get very competitive dynamic range and low light performance. These are things that I really did feel Canon needed to catch up on, and so yeah, do I lose a bit of resolution? Yes, but I think it's a worthwhile trade-off to get things like dynamic range especially. Now, just like the 1DX Mark III, the R6 does shoot a HEIF file format, which is basically an H.265 video still capture. The benefits are it's an HDR file, so you get more dynamic range than a JPEG file, the ability to play with it, edit it, and push it and pull it, but you're not getting the large file size that a RAW file is going to take up. Of course, you're not going to see any benefit on this video because we're not uploading this video in HDR, but if you do have an HDR TV or you're looking at a smartphone, it can automatically make use of that and display that extra dynamic range to you. Now, I know that might leave you with a lot of questions about this file format. The only question that really matters is how we pronounce it. Nobody's figured that out yet, really. So you could go HEIF like Heath Ledger, you could go HEF like Hugh Hefner, or you could go HEIF like Michelle Pfeiffer. And regardless, it's a very nice file format, more dynamic range, but it doesn't take up a lot of space. And that's good because on the R6, if you're shooting quickly at 12 frames per second mechanical or 20 frames per second electronic shutter, you might fill up your cards really quickly. But JPEG and HEIF, you can basically shoot as long as you want. There's basically no limit. And if you're shooting RAW files, it's still very respectable. 240 shots before it slows down. Those go to twin SD card slots with both UHS-2. So I think this is going to please a lot of action photographers, journalists, and wedding photographers. Now, autofocus on the EOS R6 is also a step up from the older EOS R cameras. You are now getting dual pixel AF version 2, same system as the 1DX Mark III, although really it is actually improved because now we also get Canon's first animal eye detect autofocus. We tried a few sample shots here. It works on cute puppy dogs and really a very impressive hit rate. For people as well, good face or eye detect. You can choose what priority you want, animals or people, of course. Now, a lot of people are going to ask, okay, is this going going to compete with a professional SLR like the 1DX Mark III. I mean, frankly, when we use the 1DX Mark III, we would always put the autofocus into live view because it did such a better job. And this has extra features like the animal eye detect. You know, really the implementation is quite nice too. You really want to have a camera that you can easily set up for autofocus. We like to link the tracking focus to a focus point. You do have to set that up though, it's not on by default, but at that point, it's very easy. I can use the touchscreen, I can use the joystick, and now it's just gonna track that focusing point. I can move it around. If it's a person's face or an animal, I can set up to this prioritized for that. I mean, frankly, it is a very effective, very easy to use autofocusing system. And if Sony's the gold standard, I would say the Canon is just like knocking on that door. I don't know, Jordan, do we just go worst photo, no stairs? That sounds good, or do we go maybe better photo, but stairs?
Worst photo.
Yeah, no stairs? Okay, no stairs.
Look at them.
We're gonna do them. Seems like Canon's made a lot of lenses and bodies in the past that were very specialized or for a particular kind of photographer, you know, or you had cameras like the Canon EOS R, which are trying to be very versatile, but had a lot of points that were lacking. And the Canon EOS R6 really seems to be a camera that's easy to recommend to a lot of different people. I mean, okay, maybe the res isn't that high, battery life could be better, but aside from that, we've got a very compact, comfortable, customizable body. We've got good displays, we've got good video capabilities, excellent autofocus, and the addition of IBIS, you know, just rounds out this package to be very usable for many different people. And because of that, I feel like this camera is firmly going to compete against things like the Sony a7 III, the Nikon Z6, the Panasonic S1 even, you know, I mean, this camera has better IBIS than the Panasonic S1 or the Nikon Z6. This camera has faster autofocusing than many of those cameras as well. This camera also has amazing video capabilities. The price point is going to be a bit on the higher side, but this is a fantastic gateway drug camera to get into excellent Canon RF lenses. And hopefully we'll see some more affordable lenses coming out in the future. And if you were using a 1DX or, you know, a Canon 5D Mark IV and you're looking to get into the mirrorless world, but still bring your lenses across, I think this is a fantastic choice to go with. You know, if you're wondering, is it the time to get into Canon mirrorless, I would say this is a great time to get into it. Really, the question you should be asking yourselves is, do I get an R6 or do I push even further and get that R5? I mean, straight out, it is really going to come down to the resolution. Do you need that 45 megapixels in your images? That's something you'll have to figure out for yourself, decide if that's what your work needs. But I will say that a lot of the great stuff from the R5 that we really wanted, like the IBIS, the autofocus, the well-designed body, is here largely in the R6 with very few changes. But we are going to talk about that quite a bit more when we do get our hands on a production R5, and of course that review is coming very, very shortly. Otherwise though, I think this might be a great option for you. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Please do check out our Instagram and our Twitter feeds. Remember, DPReview.com, we will have sample galleries from our lovely trip to Lethbridge today and many more from the staff at DPReview. Check those out. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. We will see you very soon, hopefully with a full production R5.